Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at a couple of 5 megapixel IP cameras from Reolink, who kindly sent them over, that boast an impressive feature set at an attractive price point. We're going to be looking at all those features, the software experience, and of course the image quality, and we're going to compare it against a similar Ubiquiti camera system to test the daytime and the nighttime performance. But before all that, let's jump into the all-important tech specs. So here in front of me we have the Reolink RLC-511, which is the bullet style camera, and we have the Reolink RLC-522, which is the dome style camera. These two cameras are actually very similar, but there are a couple of key differences other than the obvious form factor. Both are 5 megapixel cameras capable of providing 2560 by 1920 resolution at 30 frames per second. The dome camera has a 2.8 to 8mm lens with autofocus at f1.6, giving it a 3 times optical zoom. The bullet camera has a 2.7 to 12mm lens, also with autofocus at f1.6, giving it a 4 times optical zoom. Both these cameras have quite a wide field of view also, 94 degrees on the dome and 90 degrees on the bullet, going down to 48 and 31 degrees respectively when fully zoomed in. Both of course feature infrared night vision up to a claimed 30 meters. The bullet camera has 24 LEDs and the dome camera has 18 LEDs. So we'll see how this impacts night vision in the test later on. Both also feature infrared cut, which will help to block infrared during the day. Both are designed to be powered via Power over Ethernet, supporting the 803.2. Both are designed to be powered via Power over Ethernet and support the 803.2 AF standard. However, you can power them externally if you wish to do so. They're also IP66 rated, meaning they are safe for indoor or outdoor use. Some other standout features are both have microphones for audio recording, both have support for the ONVIF standard, and both have support for SD cards up to 64 gigabytes. However, they are clearly supposed to be used with a network video recorder or NVR because of that ONVIF support that they both have. Both also have a 2-year warranty, which is good to see over the standard 1 year. Finally, the MSRP for both these cameras is £89 for the bullet camera and £84 for the dome camera. However, you can often find them on sale for cheaper than that. Both these cameras have support for motion recording with variable sensitivity. They both can have privacy masks, allowing you to mask out certain areas that you don't want to be visible on the camera. And they both support motion alerts via push notifications and email alerts. Now let's take a quick look inside the box for these cameras. Inside the box we have the camera itself, the mounting hardware and grommets, paperwork, and an included Cat5e cable. It's nice to see this because it can be handy just for testing it on the bench before putting it into the final location. One small thing I do have to give credit to Reolink here is the design of their packaging. It's nice and small and fits the camera perfectly, and I like how they're using a soft cell foam to better protect the camera when it's getting kicked around by the couriers. Taking the cameras out the box, the first thing you'll notice is just how solid these cameras are. The bullet is made almost entirely of aluminium and actually feels like it could be a dangerous weapon. It really does have a fair amount of heft to it. As for the dome camera, the camera itself is made of aluminium, same as the bullet. However, the surrounding casing is made of plastic, which just allows it to rotate and move. Taking a closer look at the cameras, you'll notice a single cable coming from them that splits off into 3. A physical reset button, the external power supply, and of course the RJ45 jack. Now let's take a closer look at how we mount these cameras, and to be honest, it doesn't get much easier than this. The dome has a removable backing plate which allows you to mark and screw in 4 screws into the plate, and then run your cables through the center or out the side, twist on the camera and align it. The bullet camera only requires 3 screws to mount, and you don't even really have to do any aligning. Simply put in the 3 screws, loosen off the Allen key, which allows you to rotate the camera into any position you want, and then you tighten back up the Allen key and that is it fixed in position. Both these cameras are really flexible for how they mount, and they both allow you to change the position and rotate the angle at any point in the future. One tiny complaint I would like to see resolved is the inclusion of a blank for the side of the camera, just to keep any insects from getting in. But that is me really clutching at straws here. As far as setup of these cameras goes, Reolink seems to have thought of everything again. Simply download the Reolink app from the iOS or Play Store, click Add a Device, scan the QR code on the back of the camera, and through magic, Reolink will automatically add both of these cameras to your dashboard. It literally took me 20 seconds, if that, to add both of these cameras. This automatic adding also works through complicated networks too. I was able to add this over a long-range Wi-Fi link and also across several VLANs, and it somehow still managed to do it. A lot of these automatic adding procedures fall down on other cameras when I've tried to add them over this network, so I was really impressed to see it work here. So basically, I don't expect you'll have any issues adding these cameras at all. Reolink really have made this process seamless. These are IP cameras, so they're intended to be used with a network video recorder or NVR, either a third-party NVR or Reolink's own hardware NVR. However, Reolink does provide the ability to connect and talk to these cameras directly through their Android or iOS apps, or if you're on the desktop, then they have a web UI. Let's talk about the app experience first. The first thing I noticed about the app is just how clean it is and how easy it was to use. Scrolling around and going into menus is very snappy, and the whole thing is just very well laid out. Also, round of applause for including a dark mode, which I am a huge fan of. All the cameras are laid out with a preview window on the home screen, and you can tap into these previews in order to get a closer look, change settings, or play back any recordings. Tapping on a camera also gives you all the controls that you will need. Play or pause the stream, toggle the sound, take a snapshot to your phone, record video straight to your phone, or change the stream quality for lower speed connections. You can also dive into the camera settings from here, change things like the motion recording zones or sensitivity, privacy masks, push notifications, camera quality, backlight or exposure. You can also view the firmware of the camera. I also like how in the settings the icon of the camera is the same model as the camera you're connected to. It's little things like that that give great attention to detail. One other really useful bit of information is that they show the bitrate of the camera you're connected to. One downside I found here is that there is no ability to constantly record. You can only record motion. It's a strange omission because some of their other cameras apparently support this, so I'm not sure why they decided to not include that here. Although this won't be an issue for you if you're using Reolink's NVR or a third-party NVR, but if you plan to record to SD card, then it's a no-go. One other tiny issue I found was that the preview windows on the main menu don't seem to update until you tap on them. It's not really that big of an issue, and it could be resolved in a software update. Moving on to the web browser is where things unfortunately become unstuck. Immediately upon logging into these cameras using the IP address, you'll be greeted with a message asking you to enable Flash. In the year 2020, this is really unacceptable in my opinion. Chrome started blocking Flash by default back in July of 2019, and Adobe announced in 2017 that they would be end of life and killing Flash in December of 2020. Yes, 2 months away. Reolink has had plenty of opportunity to resolve this by now, and considering that these are pretty much new cameras, I don't understand their reasoning behind implementing Flash this late in the game. I really hope they remove Flash and implement HTML5 in the near future. The very near future. The very, very near future. However, some good news is that I found a post on Reddit the other day from a Reolink staff member who claims that they plan to resolve this before the end of the year. So I really hope they keep this promise. However, given that you will most likely use this with an NVR, hopefully it won't be too much of an issue for you. Still, it's no excuse from Reolink. Moving past the Flash requirement, you can pretty much do anything in the web UI as you can with the app. You can configure image quality, motion zones, privacy zones, exposure, zoom, etc. You can also view and download the recordings from the camera. However, due to some sort of limitation, you can only download one at a time, so that could become a little bit tedious. Okay, I think I've made my point clear about Flash. Let's move on to arguably the most important aspect of any camera, and that is the image quality. As mentioned, both cameras have a 5 megapixel 2560 by 1920 resolution capable of outputting 30 frames per second. We're going to use the bullet camera for our image tests. Both these cameras are almost identical in terms of their image sensor, with the dome camera having a 3x optical zoom and the bullet camera having a 4x optical zoom being the only major difference. Let's take a look at some of the sample footage from the bullet camera, and I have to say that this is among the best footage I've seen from a 5 megapixel camera. There's a lot more detail in the image than I was expecting, and the colours are also pretty accurate. It does a good job of handling the exposure too. The best way to get an accurate representation of how this camera performs is to add another camera into the mix. And for that, we're going to use the Unify G3 Bullet from Ubiquiti. The G3 Bullet is a 4 megapixel 3.6mm f1.8 camera with no optical zoom, and it is available for £140, so about £60 more expensive than the Reolink with less resolution. You could almost buy both of these cameras for the same price as the G3, although we all know that megapixels aren't everything. For my test setup, both of these cameras are side by side and close as they can be. Both are recording at their max resolution and frame rate, and all the image settings are left on auto unless otherwise stated. They're also set to 6000 kilobits per second as their bitrate. I decided to mount both of these cameras above the front door, which has a large set of steps leading up to it. It's about 16 feet from the ground level. There's a lot of construction going on at this property at the moment, so you'll have to excuse any of the wood lying around. Although we do have a very large area to play with, so that gives us a good representation of what these cameras are capable of. The first major difference you'll notice with these cameras is just how wide the field of view is on the Reolink, or maybe how narrow the field of view is on the G3. You get a considerably larger field of view on the Reolink compared to the G3, with no noticeable distortion on the lens. The next thing you'll notice is, wow, look at that image quality difference. The details in the G3 become really muddy, particularly at those further distances. Look at how much detail is lost in the grass and leaves in the distance. It's almost like the G3 makes these disappear and just merge into one, whereas the Reolink does a much better job of retaining these details. And that's before we even get into the optical zoom. The Reolink also does a far better job of the color accuracy here, with the G3 having this sort of white haze over everything for some reason. To give some reference, the distance to the bottom of the stairs from the camera is 5.5 meters, the distance to the start of the grass is 10.2 meters, and the distance to the tree in the very background is 42 meters. I'm also not doing any editing to these clips, they're just raw straight from the cameras. The only thing I am doing is moving the framing of the Reolink because it does have more resolution than the G3. You're also watching this after the YouTube compression, so you'll just have to take my word for the descriptions, but hopefully it does come across okay. So for a practical test, I thought I would dig out a number plate and we would set up a 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 and 30 meter points to see what the differences are. At 5 meters, both cameras have absolutely zero issues as expected. At 10 meters again, both are very readable, although the Reolink is slightly better to my eye just because of its increased resolution. Moving to 15 meters is where things start to get a bit more interesting. Both are again usable, but I feel the Reolink edges ahead slightly here, in particularly if we focus on the letter N on the number plate. I feel that you could mistake the G3 for an M if you were to glance, but again, both usable. Moving up to 20 meters, this is where they really start to separate. This is where we might have trouble with either camera, but the Reolink is certainly much easier to read to my eye. The M and the L sort of merge together on the G3, whereas they are still readable on the Reolink. At 25 meters, both become pretty much unusable, although the G3 surprisingly does do a better job of the sharpness of the letters at this distance. The Reolink seems to be muddying them more. And obviously at 30 meters, it's a similar story. One important feature I do feel is a necessity on any outdoor cameras is the optical zoom. It can make seeing important details much easier and can really come in handy in a pinch. It can also make positioning your camera much easier if you know you can correct the distance by zooming. The Reolink Bullet has a 4x optical zoom and the Dome has a 3x optical zoom. It's cool that you can also see the lens moving. Back to the number plate tests, we aren't going to do any comparisons here to the G3 because the G3 does not have an optical zoom. It has digital only, which we all know is absolutely terrible. Instead, we're going to compare to the standard unzoomed image of the RLC-511 or the Bullet camera. I'll let the footage run through here and you can clearly see the difference for yourself. We also get our first look at the autofocus performance here, which does extremely well and is pretty quick in my experience. It does become unstuck in the dark, however we will get into that in the next test. You can see here just how much of an improvement optical zoom can make to an image. It turns this unreadable and unusable number plate into something that is actually really clear and crisp. Overall, I was really impressed with the optical zoom performance. Let's take a look at the night performance of the Reolink and the G3. I wasn't able to do the number plate test here because the infrared was blowing the number plate completely out of exposure. However, let's look at some sample footage. Infrared was actually really impressive on the Reolink. You can see just how much brighter and how much more detail is captured in the Reolink compared to the G3. However, the auto exposure on the Reolink is struggling here a little bit just because of how bright those infrared LEDs are. You can see it's completely blowing out and overexposing the highlights on my face. But you can see after tweaking the exposure levels to manual, you get a much more usable image. It's good that you actually have these controls on the Reolink, whereas I don't think the G3 even has them. I do have to mention that this is a challenging environment for both of these cameras. It's incredibly dark up there with no streetlights around, and there are tons of trees. It's like a black hole up there at night. There is a night and day difference, pun intended, between these two cameras. The Reolink absolutely wipes the floor with the G3. On the G3 you can barely distinguish between the grass on the hill and the grass in the background. And look at how many weird artifacts are around my body as I walk around on the G3. Those aren't present on the Reolink. One issue I did have with the Reolink is the autofocus. It pretty much is unusable in the dark. It took literally 2 minutes for the camera to focus on me in the dark when I zoomed in. However, you do have those manual focus controls available to you if you wish. Hopefully they can fix this with a software update. One final test I wanted to run was a microphone test of the Reolink against the G3. And again, I did that from 5 to 30 meters. I tried to speak at a consistent volume at each stage of the test. This is a 5-meter microphone test on the Reolink and the G3. This is a 5-meter microphone test on the Reolink and the G3. At 5 meters, both cameras handled this without issue. I do prefer the quality of the G3 over the Reolink here, although it does seem to be amplifying the background noise a little bit more than the Reolink does. This is a 10-meter microphone test on the Reolink and the G3. This is a 10-meter microphone test on the Reolink and the G3. At 10 meters again, both have no issues. It's the same story, I do prefer the G3 over the Reolink. The Reolink seems to be a lot more tinny to my ears. This is a 15-meter microphone check on the Reolink and the G3. This is a 15-meter microphone check on the Reolink and the G3. At 15 meters, the G3 does a really good job here. The Reolink does capture everything, however certain words do seem to be hard to make out. This is a 20-meter microphone check on the Reolink and the G3. This is a 20-meter microphone check on the Reolink and the G3. At 20 meters, the roles seem to have reversed. I'm able to make out more on the Reolink than I am on the G3 personally, which seems to have gotten a little bit quieter. At 25 meters, the levels of both microphones drop off almost completely. Both seem to be struggling because of the sound of an approaching motorbike in the distance. I am personally able to make out more words on the Reolink than I am on the G3. This is 30-meter microphone check on the Reolink and the G3. This is 30-meter microphone check on the Reolink and the G3. At 30 meters, we have a surprise comeback from the Reolink. With the sound of the bike much quieter at this point, it's able to regain some of the lost volume in my voice. The G3 does better than the 25 meter mark, however it's still very quiet. The quality of both mics here was actually surprising. I didn't expect to be able to make out much past 15 meters on either, so being able to make out certain words at double that distance was a surprise. I think both microphones do a good job here and are comparable. At shorter distances, I think the G3 sounds much better, and the Reolink sounded better at a longer distance, at least to my ears. I asked my girlfriend to do a blind test of these microphones, and she agreed with me that up to 15 meters the G3 was better. However, after that, sometimes the Reolink was better, but she overall preferred the G3. So now we've seen every aspect of these two cameras, what's the verdict? Well, as we've seen, both these two cameras pack a serious punch. Image quality is very good from their 5 megapixel sensors, and that's without the optical zoom. However, having that optical zoom really allows you to pull out those fine details you would have otherwise missed. They have all the usual features that you would come to expect. Motion recording, push and email notifications, audio recording, and my personal favourite, ONVIF support. I'm seriously happy to see ONVIF support included in both these cameras, and I hope Reolink continues to implement it in all their future cameras. It really does open up a whole ton more flexibility for anyone looking to use them. My only slight complaints here are the use of flash in the web UI, autofocus struggling a little bit in the dark, and the omission of always on recording. Although to be fair, that is easily resolved if you're using an NVR, which I suspect most people will. The good news here is that all of these problems could be resolved with a software update, and in the case of the flash problem, I really have faith that Reolink will follow through and deliver here. If you're looking to invest in some camera hardware, both of these should be very high on your shortlist. They really have no downsides, and at £89 and £84 respectively, they are some of the best cameras out there in my opinion. But what do you guys think about these two cameras? Let me know in the comments down below. While you're down there, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and let me know your feedback. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.